All right, let's get started. Good evening, everybody. My name is Matt Molina. I'm the director and founder of NYC H2O. I'm very excited to be joined by Marielle Anzelone tonight. She will be talking to us about New York City wildflowers, which is a topic that we at NYC H2O are very excited about and interested in because we plant wildflowers all over the city in its natural areas in city parks. So we're real excited to have Marielle. For those of you who are just joining us, please, to help with transmission, we ask that you keep your camera off and microphones off. And at the end, we'll invite you to ask questions on camera or in the chat. Just a couple of words about NYC H2O. We are a nonprofit organization based in New York City, and we do programs all around the city. A lot of environmental education programs. Like today, we brought two classes from Maspeth, Queens to the Ridgewood Reservoir, which is an incredible natural area where we do a lot of work planting flowers and teaching kids about New York City's water system. So we invite you to join us for some of our programs. We do programs for schools and also families. We will have a horseshoe crab walk on June 18th, and that'll be posted shortly. I'd like to thank our board of directors for doing an incredible job helping us keeping things going. The city council and the Department of Cultural Affairs for helping us keeping the wheels spinning. All right. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker tonight. Marielle Anzelone is an urban ecologist who connects people with nature and design and educates them. And she is the founder of New York City Wildflower Week and started that in 2007 to engage New York citizens with the flora here in New York City. Her writing has been featured in the New York Times, Daily News, and she's also leading monthly discussions on the Brian Lehrer Show on WNYC. So, and I think, Marielle, your next show is on Friday?
On Thursday.
On Thursday.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to tune in. So without further ado, Marielle, the floor is yours, please.
Okay. Thank you so much, Matt. I really appreciate it. And I'm really pleased to be, have NYC H2O invite me to speak to everyone about wildflowers of New York City. This is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. And as Matt said, I started NYC Wildflower Week. I used to work for the City Parks Department. I was a city plant ecologist. And when I left, I started this organization because I felt like there was a need for more plant education and awareness. So NYC Wildflower Week 2022 is just finishing up, but we're actually going to continue to have programs throughout the year. And so that's the website on the homepage if anyone's interested. And yeah, so let's take a tour of our flora. Here is some wildflowers in Pelham Bay Park in the Bronx. And I always do not like pictures that show plants and don't say where it is. So that's not me. All my pictures have locations. Okay, let's do it. So talking about, I should go back, talking about being a botanist in New York City, you know, most people think that you're working in places like this. And, you know, you do work in places like this. This looks a little sad. I mean, largely because it's also the very beginning of the growing season. It's spring, so it hasn't greened up enough. But you can see there's some garbage, you know, there's some car parts, etc. And that's not uncommon in the city to come across things like this. But this is not all of what New York City looks like. New York City can also look like this. This is Blue Heron Park in Staten Island. And you'll note up front left is Juncus effusus in flower. And I'll bet Matt plants a lot of that in wetland restoration projects. That's a popular one. But this is, you know, this is a freshwater wetland in New York City that we have these kinds of sites still in the city. And it might surprise some people to know that New York City has more natural area than any other city in North America. And it serves more people, of course. We have over 8 million people. So we have the largest park system in the country. So you may not know this, but New York City has approximately 14,000 acres of forests. And here is an example of the beautiful upland forests of Van Cortlandt Park in the Bronx. We have this kind of forest type, upland forest, in all 5 boroughs. And in lower left, you can see a sapling of a tulip tree. So there's regeneration happening here. There's lots of richness and density. There's lots of green. This is an awesome photo. We also have freshwater wetlands. And this is something that you'll find pockets of in Ridgewood Reservoir. This happens to be Clay Pit Pond State Park, which is in Staten Island. And here you'll see some cinnamon fern that's just starting to come up here. And this is a red maple, and the leaves are still red as they're emerging in the springtime. And here is tussock sedge. We also have salt marshes, and here's Marine Park in Brooklyn. And oops, we'll go back to that. And this is Spartina alterna flora, which is the dominant grass in our wetlands, in our salt marshes, sorry, specifically saltiness. It's called salt marsh cordgrass. And here you can see that it's in flower. What? Grasses flower? Oh my gosh, yes, they do. And here it is in flower. You can see these are all the male parts kind of dangling the pollen. So all those little white linear dots, that's the male parts. And they're wind pollinated, so the flowers don't look the way you might expect a flower to, but they are in fact angiosperms. So I tricked everyone a little bit when I said wildflowers of New York City. I'm talking every wildflower. We also might mention some non-flowering plants as well. Here's White Island in Brooklyn, and this is a grassland. It's interesting because our grasslands are different than people think of grasslands as prairie. New York City does not have prairie. Prairies are very different. Prairies are limited to grasses due to fire strikes, but our grasslands tend to be on really poor soils. Unlike the Midwest, we have highly sandy soils, and that limits the amount of water the soils can hold. And so trees need a lot of water to grow, and that's what limits tree growth. Here we have Panicum virgatum, which is switchgrass, and that's a common wildflower in New York City as well. So interestingly, New York City is also home to more than 40% of New York State's rare and endangered plant species, largely because we are the southernmost extent of the state, the geopolitical boundaries of the state. So Kurt Vonnegut called New York City Skyscraper National Park. But as I mentioned before, we do have a lot of plants and a large park system. But it's interesting to note that all of this is happening in this highly urbanized landscape. And so out of all the nature that we have, as you might imagine, some of it's not doing so well. And over the last 100 years, 75% of the city's natural areas have been destroyed. So we've already lost 43% of our native flora, including pennywort, which is on the left, and yellow fringed orchid, which is a wetland orchid. And I'll talk a little bit more about orchids in a minute. And I guess, you know, when you're thinking about this, of course, people are going to say, yes, of course, Marielle, it's a city. Of course, we've lost plants, duh. This is what people always say to me when I write things or talk about it. But I also think it's important to recognize that there are choices involved in losing the landscapes that we have. And so these things, it doesn't have to be one or the other. It doesn't have to be an either or situation. We can have both. But we so far have not chosen to have both. So how is our flora doing? Our flora is not doing very well. And there's an article in the New York Times not that long ago that talked about how great nature was doing in New York City. But I would push back on that and say nature, wildlife might be doing really well. Our flora is not. And so by flora, so when you think about the world as a plant conservation biologist, you think thusly. Plants that grow in a certain spot, once they're lost, they're gone. Then if you come in and restore them, it's not the same thing as the original plant that you lost. So once they're lost, in some cases we can restore them, but it's not quite the same thing. So they don't get counted in the same way. So that's important to remember. New York City has about 1,500 plants. There are about 1,357 that were ever recorded. And of those, only 778 species remain. And as you might expect, woody plants were the most resilient. The herbaceous things that grow on the ground layer, like ferns and forbs, which are wildflowers and grasses, were far less resilient because they don't have that wood to protect them. Annuals and biennials also did better than perennials, which makes sense because annuals and biennials are shorter lived, and if there's threats to the herbaceous ground layer, they can survive as seed, whereas the other plants would survive as the actual plant tissue. Wetlands and open meadows have been hit hardest. They've lost the most plants, and we have the most exotic plants in the boroughs of Manhattan and Brooklyn. And so one really good example of this is orchids. It might surprise people to know that New York City has orchids, but in fact we do. There are temperate terrestrial orchids. Most people think of orchids as being epiphytes that grow in the tropics. That's also true. But we do have orchids, and we used to have 30 species of orchids in New York City. And we know this from herbaceous specimens that were collected in the last century or two. Botanists, New York City area was very popular with botanists, and it's very well botanized. So we have historical records of what used to grow here before it was heavily urbanized. So we know that there were 30 species of orchids. Today we only have 6 species left, and all of them are doing really badly, unfortunately. So the 6 orchids that we have left, I'll show you here. This is large coral root. It's known from only one population, a handful of individuals. We have pink lady slipper here. This is known from only 3 locations in the city. This is downy rattlesnake plantain. It's known from only one population that I've only seen one in Staten Island. We also have world begonia, which is a federally listed plant. We have that here. That's also in Staten Island. Bog tway blade, which is this one down here that's kind of greenish looking. That's also a wetland orchid. And then all the way to the right, we have nodding ladies tresses. And that's also known from a handful of populations. So all of them they might exist on paper. We have them, but in practicality and practice out in the field, there's only a handful of stems. Of course, orchids don't flower every year, but they're not very robust, so they're not doing great. And furthermore, orchids tend to be very persnickety. They are very good indicators of excellent habitat. So you can, as you can imagine, New York City might not have a lot of high quality habitat left. So we're losing the orchids for a number of reasons, not the least of which is that we don't manage to preserve the habitat for these orchids. Some of them might need a more slightly open understory, and there's no management happening to do that. The orchids do have one bright side, and it's this plant. This is Epipactis helleborine, which is broadleaf helleborine, and it's an exotic orchid, and it's spreading throughout the 5 boroughs. It's not necessarily invasive, but it is growing more and more common. Okay. Sorry, water break. Okay, so in Staten Island, you know, we still have places like this. And in fact, Staten Island, when you look at the city as a whole, is an outlier. And if you were to pull Staten Island and all of its flora off, the outlook for our plants would be even sadder than it already is, because Staten Island is a plant refugia. It has 10% of its land is preserved, and so it really bolsters the city's native plant numbers. But even in Staten Island, since 1990, it's lost more than 30% of its indigenous flora, including nodding trillium and wood lily. And no plants were able to survive the intensive onslaught of urbanization. And for a lot of our native plants, habitat protection is the only hope for survival. So this is an op-ed that I wrote a number of years ago now on plants that are locally extinct in New York City. A term that you'd use would be extirpated. And again, when I wrote this and it was published, I had people writing to me and saying like, well, she's an idiot. Of course, plants are going to be lost in New York City. But again, you know, it's this idea of we've lost plants. Maybe we didn't always have to lose them. And in fact, I'll go through these. This is swamp pink. This is actually a federally listed plant. We had one known population in Staten Island. And when the person discovered it, he did a wild dance of joy, which I feel like I would totally do a wild dance of joy too if I saw it. This is white milkweed. And this here is soapwort gentian. And soapwort gentian, all the way to the right, the blue one, is only known to be locally extinct or extirpated in recent times. So it was last seen in Staten Island, I believe it was in 2002, and it was essentially lost because there was no habitat management to hold on to its populations. So the idea that, you know, all of this happened in the past is not true. It's the present and the future. There's this continued push for different land uses, even on parks property. So understanding what the threats are to these plants is really important, because then hopefully we can all raise our voices to say that we really want to keep them. So one thing is a development. This was taken in Kreischer Hill. This area used to be 110 acres of open space that was glacial till soils, like these beautiful special soils that had a number of rare plants and wildlife on the site. And it's now a area of big box stores. And the land was owned by the city's Economic Development Corporation, and it had been slated for development for a number of years. But this was just really heartbreaking. This is like me crying, looking through a fence, taking this picture. So development is not in the rearview mirror. Development certainly happens. Another thing is increased use by humans. This is a picture in Cunningham Park. And what we're looking at here is mineral soils, and this destruction is caused by the use of ATVs. All-terrain vehicles or off-road vehicles are outlawed in New York City, but when the police see you using them, they'll send you into the parks and say, you know, you shouldn't be on city streets, it's illegal, go ride in a park. And this is what people do, and this is what happens. And so soils are really important for native flora. And you can imagine earlier when I spoke of how woody plants were resilient and herbaceous plants were not, you can see how all the herbaceous plants underneath this tree are gone, and it's just the tree. But what else is gone? The forest nursery, which is the organic layer of the forest floor. So all the baby trees that would come up to replace these trees shown here are also gone. And this now needs, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of restoration, which could have been prevented by just keeping them out in the first place. And so this also chews up habitat and makes it into, creates more edge, and edge encourages the incursion of invasive species. So we have more exotics in New York City than they do in rural areas. And in fact, the majority of our parks have invasives, I think really all of our parks, it might be 95, 97% of all our parks have invasive species in them. So there's really nowhere to hide. The one I'm showing here is Oriental bittersweet. And this was purported to be brought into this country by the New York Botanic Garden. Botanic gardens historically would introduce a lot of exotic species because they were beautiful, they were aesthetically pleasing. And that's why they were introduced. So Oriental bittersweet, there's a number of problems with it. Number one is the way that it grows. Vines are kind of lazy and they don't spend as much of their metabolic energy making really strong and sturdy wood like a tree or a shrub. And so this is a woody vine, but it creates just enough wood to kind of give it some structure, but not to be able to hold it up. And so it leans on other plants to get to the canopy. And so what this does is it winds around trees and shrubs, and it ends up effectively kind of choking them and creating, cutting into the bark. And so creating opportunities for pathogens to get into the tree and shrub. Another thing that you can see here is that it grows very much, it's very much a bully in our natural areas, and it really covers the things that it grows on. It doesn't just grow up the tree, it grows all over it. And so it's doing a number of things. One, it's really heavy, so its biomass is weighing down the tree or shrub underneath that's trying to hold it up. Number two, it's effectively starving the plants underneath because it's really created this foliar blanket on top of them, and it's not allowing them to photosynthesize. This is in the end of the growing season. So this picture was taken maybe in like November, but you can see that the fruits are still really visible. The upper right, you can see what the fruits look like. They're these beautiful yellow skins that peel back to show these bright red arrows underneath, and they're very striking. And so that's the aesthetic beauty of the plant. Interestingly, there is a native bittersweet, it's called American bittersweet, and it does grow in New York City. It's a New York City rare species, but because Oriental bittersweet is so pervasive and it's just absolutely everywhere, that even the places where we have our native bittersweet, the plants would hybridize. So the result is that even our native species can no longer produce native progeny offspring. So yeah, it's a bummer, invasives. And so here, another reason is, why does it matter? Matt asked me yesterday, we had a little chat before I did the talk, and he was like, what's your elevator pitch to people? Why do plants matter? And I said, birds. Because a lot of people might not care about plants, they might not care about lots of things, but almost everyone cares about birds and really likes birds. So I would encourage everyone to tune in to the next Brian Lehrer Trees segment, which we mentioned will be this Thursday at around 11:30, because the person on is Dr. Desiree Narango, and she is a former graduate student of Douglas Tallamy. And Douglas Tallamy is like a god in plant circles because he came up with the Holy Grail. People should care about native plants because of birds. So this gets into the ecology of it. We don't like native plants because we're trying to be mean to exotic plants. Like, I like a good lilac. I'm totally into them, and I think they're beautiful and they smell amazing. But if we only planted lilacs in our landscape, we would not have birds. Because what he's shown is that, New York City used to be glaciated. And then as the glaciers melted over thousands of years, plants started moving in. And so did wildlife and insects and fungi and pathogens, diseases, and all of these things kind of mix together and have relationships with each other. And that relationship is really, really important. So plants don't want to be eaten and have a biochemistry to ward off predators, but caterpillars need to eat. And so caterpillars will come up with mechanisms in order to bypass a plant's biochemistry. And a really famous example of that would be monarchs and milkweed. And I have a monarch caterpillar here. But in fact, the majority of caterpillars, this is true. They might not be as specific as monarchs, but it's true for any number of insects. And so here is the eastern spicebush, eastern tiger swallowtail, and this needs a spicebush in the landscape. As a caterpillar, it only eats plants in the laurel ace family, so that would be spicebush and sassafras. And if we don't have those in the landscape, you will not have this butterfly, no matter how many nectar plants you plant. When people talk about nectar gardens, that's wrong. We don't need nectar gardens. We need caterpillar gardens. If you're not feeding the caterpillars, you will not get butterflies. Butterflies will nectar on almost anything. Caterpillars are very, very picky. Again, because of the plant biochemistry, it's very metabolically expensive to be such a specific eater. So if you don't have those things in the landscape, they will not survive. And then related to birds, what Douglas Tallamy found, that holy grail I mentioned, is that birds, 95% of North American birds feed their young bugs. What kind of bugs? Caterpillars. Where do caterpillars come from? Native plants. So for example, he looked at dogwoods, and he's looked at lots and lots of different species. But interestingly, dogwoods are interesting because we do have a number of non-native and native dogwoods in our landscape. So our native flowering dogwood is Cornus florida, and it's planted a lot as a landscape tree. It also grows wild in New York City as an understory tree in our woodlands. And it still has its flowering bracts on it. If you're interested in seeing it, run out to the woods. It's beautiful. So our native dogwood is eaten by 117 species of moths and butterflies as caterpillars. The Parks Department plants Kuza dogwood, and which is Cornus kuza, and cornelian cherry, which is also a dogwood, and that's Cornus moss. And these are both species from Asia, and they support 0 insect herbivores. So 0 caterpillars eat them. So in a landscape, if you were a female butterfly looking to lay eggs and all you saw was Cornus moss and Cornus kuza, these exotic Asian species, it would look as if there were only pink flamingos, plastic pink flamingos in the landscape. There's nothing there. And that's why we care about native plants. That's because of the ecology. It's really, really critical. And so you'll learn more about chickadees and insects being fed to chickadees as critical bird food. Yeah, the parents bring caterpillars back to the nest for their nestlings to eat before they've fledged. And the guest on Thursday will talk more about it. It's going to be really good. You should definitely listen in. And then I've done some writing. This was, 10 years ago. Oh my goodness. Where I did some reporting on the woods. I went into the woods and I reported on what was happening in the spring. And it's just to say, there's so many beautiful things going on in New York City. Instead of just thinking about everything as, you know, in springtime, oh, it's tulips, oh, it's daffodils. They're beautiful to look at, and it's really fun to see them, but we can't forget about the beauty and wonder of our city's natural areas in springtime as well. So here's a spicebush cluster. This is in flower. And again, we need spicebush in the landscape if we want to have spicebush swallowtails to flit about us. Here's a spring beauty, and it has an acorn ant on it. The ant is looking, it's stealing the nectar, and you call it stealing because the ant isn't going to actually pollinate the flower. It's taking the nectar resources that the plant has made, but it's not actually going to pollinate it. So hopefully the flower makes enough nectar that the ant can do that, and typically they do. It's fine. Here we have emerging leaves of a mockernut, and this is a native species of hickory, and hickories are sorry, hickories are a native tree genera. It's Caria. So we have Caria, 3 different species. So I should say a little bit more about that too. When people talk about maples, oh, that's a maple. Well, which species of maple? Because we have a number of different maples in New York City. Some are rare and some are not rare. We also have a number of native species of oak. We have a number of non-native species of oak. In fact, some of those are being planted. We have, yeah, so there's native and non-native species. It's really important to get to what is the species and not just the genus. And I just think this picture is really beautiful because it shows the emerging leaves and how red and lovely they are. When leaves emerge in the spring, it's the same look as the fall foliage, except backwards, and the palette is smaller, so you don't get to see it. It's not as bright and as showy because the leaves are smaller, but it is really beautiful. And so in springtime, watching leaves emerge is really fun. So I just think this is cool. This is a number of species that are native to the city, that are insects, and we have a bunch of different ones here. And, you know, the idea that we have like native flies, I think people don't like flies, but, you know, like here, the bottom middle, this is a golden-backed snipe fly, which is amazing. Like, how beautiful is that fly? And thinking about a fly as being beautiful and elegant seems improbable, but in fact, houseflies give native flies a bad name. We have a lot of native flies that are important pollinators in the city. And so these show some others. There's a skipper in here, an orb weaver spider, metallic green and gold fly, and then a waved light fly here. And these are crane flies. So a lot of really neat things. Here's other cool things you'll see if you go in the woods. These are things, again, that you typically don't see if you're walking around the sidewalk. Well, not all of it. But you can see upper left here is a sweet gum. There's last year's fruit. And to the left is a flower that's just going to start turning into the fruit. We also have something really cool below it, is a maple eye spot gall. And those are galls. There, you can see the yellow blisters, and it's encircled by this cherry red kind of ring, and it's on red maple leaves. That's how you can tell if something's a red maple or not. One way to tell in later in spring. And those are gall wasps that will be hatched from there. And so that's something else really cool. Again, ecology, ecology, ecology. All of these relationships is really cool, really important. And you'll only see them around native plants. We have something else. We have a immature caterpillar of a bagworm moth. That's what this little structure is over here. We also have a red admiral butterfly, and these are also migratory species. They migrate in the springtime. And they've migrated over New York City for thousands of years, and they're beautiful and remarkable. So again, one of the issues that we have, excuse my coughed up. So one of the issues that we have in this city is that, you know, some of it that's not preserved as open space is going to be built on. And in fact, this sign is so old that this strip mall is already there. So why does it matter? Why should we care? Because New York City is a city, and the idea that cities don't have nature, like, you know, it's a thing that we all feel like we know. But, you know, it matters for a number of reasons. According to the United Nations, the world is currently urban. So more people now live in cities than they do in rural areas. So the nature that people experience by default will be urban nature. And so by extension, New York City is a model. We're a global city. So we should be thinking about what is the blueprint for biodiversity that we are drafting as a global city. And in fact, there's not a lot going on around biodiversity. There's a lot more that New York City needs to do. I have been advocating for New York City to come up with a biodiversity agenda. In fact, some of you may know about the Paris Climate Accord for, well, for climate, obviously, but there is also a Paris Climate Accord, but for nature. And that is with, that is with the UNCBD. So for all of the ways and people were upset and the outrage around, you know, our last federal administration talking about pulling us out of the Paris Climate Accord, it may interest people to know that the United States has never been party to the UN Convention on Biological Diversity. In fact, we're the only country in the world that has not signed this treaty. And I think that's shocking, and I think that's sad. The richest country in the world doesn't participate in these discussions, so therefore, you know, the most powerful man in the world, perhaps arguably, you know, doesn't talk about biodiversity. The US doesn't pay our dues. And also given the fact that the President of the United States is covered by, you know, major media outlets around the world, and that man is not talking about biodiversity, it's not being covered in the media, it's a huge, huge loss. And there's so much that New York City could do to step into and fill that role as a global city. But currently, I'm just hoping that the mayor, the current new mayor, will fully fund the Parks Department, at least to the 1% that he had agreed to when he was campaigning. The Parks Department needs all the money it gets. It's one of the most underfunded agencies in the city. So at any rate, there's a huge opportunity for New York City. New York City is doing very little. Whoops. And, you know, it also, before I move on to Wildflower Week, you can Google a city name and the word biodiversity, and you'll get a hit. So when I talk to people in the mayor's office, the last administration, the administration before that, the current administration, I talk about this to basically anyone who's standing still. We need biodiversity policy in New York City. We need to protect native species. We need to be part of this global conversation around nature in cities. And, you know, so there's so much that New York City can do. We're not doing enough. And the world is really looking toward New York City for leadership. And there's a huge, huge opportunity. So I have lots of ideas around that, which I can share in a little bit. But if it's something that you're interested in, yeah, I'd really encourage you to get in touch with me because we'll be doing more around, in the coming months, we're going to be doing more around pushing for biodiversity policy and such. So Wildflower Week, this is obviously an old screenshot of my website. But again, New York City Wildflower Week is just coming to an end, but we are going to be offering wildflower walks throughout the growing season. We're also talking about trees because people on Brian Lehrer Trees were interested in doing specifically trees. But really, we're just talking about plants in general and the idea that plants are very much in the background. And in fact, there's this condition that's called plant blindness, which is not a very great term because it's really ableist. But this idea of plant, that people don't notice plants, that plants seem to be something that's perpetually in the background. And so it's something that people never really focus on. And why that's important and why it matters is that plants get really overlooked in terms of conservation and management. It's always about wildlife and birds, you know, and wildlife and birds are great, but as I mentioned before, birds will not survive if they don't have plants to create the caterpillars they need to feed. So we need the plants too. It's really important. So Wildflower Week, that's kind of how we started because I was like, I can't be the only one who knows and cares about plants. Let's get more plant people. And so that's the work that we do. And also Con Edison has been our sponsor for all this time, so we're grateful to them for their ongoing support. So what do we do during Wildflower Week? We do a lot of different things. We have kids events to find different ways to pull people in. So we have these musical events. Here you can see Lloyd from the Deedle Deedle Dees, who was singing about hugging trees. Super cute. We have a salt marsh tour that was at low tide at Fourth Sparrow Marsh in Brooklyn. And then this is me at the very first Wildflower Week with the then Parks Commissioner, Adrienne Benepe, who once said to me, every week should be Wildflower Week. And I was like, yeah, you know it. So yeah, we're grateful for his support too. He was always very supportive. So, and we do tours all through the city. It's not just natural areas. We do tours of gardens, tours of green roofs. There's workshops, and we do plant giveaways. So we're doing a lot of things to find opportunities to engage people with nature and very specifically wild plants. And in fact, we have a number of programs that are coming up this week. This weekend we have two. We have one on Saturday, one on Sunday. And Sunday is going to be a really great native plant garden talk, habitat gardening for insect pollinators. So you should definitely check that out. This was a project that I did a long time ago, and only parts of it are still there. But it was kind of cool, this idea that you could have a native plant display garden in a place where people walked by. So the idea was to have this passive educational opportunity. So this was one of the things that Wildflower Week launched a number of years ago. But this was in Union Square Park. The bid was not what I think had kind of mixed feelings about it. And now the area is seating for people to, enjoy lunch, but there are still a number of native plants in the area, which they haven't cut down. I feel like if they knew they were native, they would get rid of them. But they're still there. So I go and take pictures and I kind of giggle to myself. But these are also opportunities to work with school kids. This was working with a local high school, Washington Irving High School, which is really close to here. And this was one of our kids events. This was super fun and cute. And also I've done work with school kids, working with teachers to talk to kids about native plants, especially at the elementary school level. And I've led natural area walks for elementary public school kids too. So getting kids excited is really fun. And I've heard people say, getting kids is like the answer to our environmental ills. And of course it is. But I also didn't get excited about nature until I was in grad school, college. So it's not too late. Okay. So this is Pelham Bay Bark in the Bronx. This is from not that long ago. This is Hunter Island, and just this beautiful array of trout lily. You can see the genetic diversity among the trout lily here. If you look closely at the different anthers, they're different colors. This one's yellow, and some of them are going to be more of like a brick red, and some of them might be kind of a tawny color. And so the different so that tells you about the genetic diversity within the population. So, but the thing about this trout lily is that, this is very sensitive to ATVs. This is very sensitive to invasive species. So we really need to save places in situ. On the ground conservation is really key to saving these kinds of species. So if we don't have local laws that protect these kinds of plants and protect forever wild sites. Forever wild sites are forever wild in name only. There's no actual legislation in place to protect them. So I think it's really important to kind of remember that it's just in name only, and this idea that what backs it up, and there is really nothing to back it up. So that's pretty important. So a lot of the work is shifting urbanites' perspectives on nature in the city and their relationship to it. So what I hope to do is encourage this more expansive view of New York City and what it can be. So is it a skyscraper national park? Or is it something more where we have native chestnut oaks, we have metallic bees, we have trout lily, and places for all New Yorkers to take it in? And nature is important for the wildlife around us, and it's also important for people. There's a huge body of research that talks about the benefit of being in nature for people, and it has all kinds of incredible impacts, including it slows the spread of some cancers. So it's really remarkable what nature can do, and it feeds our hearts and our souls. And so we all need to get out into the woods and look at wildflowers. Thank you so much. That's the end of my talk.
Agreed. We all do need to get out and experience and enjoy nature. I couldn't have said it any better. Thank you, Marielle. That was really inspiring. I learned so much. And the thing that resonates with me tremendously is that UN statistic that most people live in cities. So it follows that most people will experience nature in cities. And that's why it is so important for us to have a biodiversity policy and involve our young people. So thanks for making that very clear. We're gonna turn to our Q&A. We have some real ringers here. So there are some excellent questions in the chat. I look forward to doing the wild dance of joy very soon. And but I also just want to mention, we have a ton of sassafras at the Ridgewood Reservoir. So we get quite a bit of the Eastern tiger swallowtail. So I invite everybody to come out and check it out. Okay, there's some great stuff in the chat. I'm going to go back to the top. Avanesh asks, please let us know what's the status of wildflowers and native plants and trees in New York City. You did that. Okay, moving on. George asks, Jorge asks, are there wildflowers with medicinal properties in New York City?
Yes, but I'm going to be kind of cagey about it and not really answer that question, because I'm going to push back a little bit on that question. People ask, when you go out into the wild and you see wildflowers, people ask, well, what does it do? And we don't ask the same thing of birds. Are birds medicinal? Are birds useful for people? Birds are wild and live and thrive, you know, in some of the places where we live. And so do some of our wildflowers. And so I would say that yes, some of them have medicinal properties. A number of them can be over-collected. A number of them are edible and people over-collect them. And that's really not what we want. We want wildflowers left in the wild for other wildlife to enjoy them and to feed on them and to pollinate them, and for us to take pictures of and learn more about and appreciate, but from a safe distance.
That's a good
Sorry,
answer.
I know it's no one likes that answer, but
I like the answer. But to that, I'll add, we H2O offers medicinal plant walks, and so we welcome you to join us for those, and you can get the other perspective.
yeah.
Marielle, Mandy Eichert is a name you might know from the past. Mata Hari, a former Parky from StarQuest days.
Oh, okay, awesome.
All right. Somebody from Flatbush, the Flatbush gardener.
Yes.
Says, what distinguishes a prairie from another kind of meadow?
Oh, that's a good question. And Chris he's the one who's doing the habitat gardening walk on Sunday at his home, which is really nice. So grassland, yeah. So grasslands are systems that are dominated by grasses, right? But why the grasses are there is there's different reasons, and like those mechanisms that keep the grasses dominant are what makes our grassland different from prairies. So like I mentioned earlier, you know, the breadbasket of the country is the Midwest, and that's because of the prairie. Prairies were plowed under and turned into farmland, and crops are grown there. And the soils are really rich for that reason. We have very few grasslands, and our grasslands are dominated by sandy soils. And the water holding capacity of sandy soils is really poor. Water basically blows right through it. You can imagine if you spill a Coke on the beach, it doesn't puddle at all, it just goes right into the sand. It's gone. You know, where if you were on different kind of soil, it might puddle a little bit. So the fact that it does that means that water is the same way. Trees need quite a lot of water. And that's the reason why the grasslands here are not, the trees aren't suppressed by fire, but it's the soil, the low water holding capacity of the soil that keeps trees out.
Gotcha. Daniel asks, there used to be rare plants at Last Chance Pond in Staten Island. Also Oakwood Beach in Staten Island.
Yes. Yes. I don't know Last Chance Pond. Is that the question?
You said, weren't these rare plant refuges recently decimated for stormwater retention ponds?
Yeah. So, well, not okay. Yeah. Almost. So yes, good question. And so when I was talking about development, this is one of the things I was talking about, and I so appreciate that question. And in fact, I should have put it in the slides, and it didn't occur to me because I was just there. But so Oakwood Beach is a place in Staten Island. That's right. And in fact, people who are interested should definitely message me, because we're interested in pushing back against the AOC, oh my goodness, excuse me, the Army Corps of Engineers, ACOE's decision to create a resilient structure and hard infrastructure, gray infrastructure, and destroy the plant refugia, just as was mentioned. There's plants that are there that are rare in New York City. I saw Manthamum stellatum, which is starry false lily of the valley. That's maybe the common name of it. And it's a plant that's rare in New York City. Turk's cap lily is a wetland species, Matt, that maybe grew at one time in Ridgewood Reservoir. It likes open, sunny, freshwater sites, but it's definitely also at this site. And it's going to be destroyed. So the Parks Department is in the middle of rescuing plants. In other words, digging these plants up and bringing them to the native plant nursery in Staten Island, which is part of the Parks Department, to hold on to until they can decide what to do with them. But the destruction of the site has been pushed back at least 2 years. So we're going to try to use that timeline to see if we can save these sandy hummocks. Because they're really, really important sites. These are sandy sites. We have very few grasslands left in the city. This is a true grassland. And grassland species are very rare because the habitat for them is rare. So this is a really special, really critical site that needs to be saved. And that's something that I've been talking to the American Littoral Society about. And we're going to be looking into what we can do, but we're definitely going to be doing something. So people who are interested, please reach out.
Wonderful. Beth says that Central Park used to have a little cluster of yellow lady slipper, but they disappeared, unfortunately. And she thinks somebody dug them up.
I'm sure they probably did. The lady slipper wouldn't have been native. They might have been planted. I hope I'm not totally speaking out of turn. A lot of plants have been planted in Central Park as a restoration project. And in fact, that was done for a long time by my friend Regina Alvarez, who's amazing and did really good work in Central Park.
I think she's in tonight.
Is she? Oh, hi, Regina. I'm shouting you out. And so she could speak to whether that was planted or not. But a lot of native plants, so I'm not sure if this was like in recent memory. If it was, then I'd say that it probably was planted by Regina. Um, because most of the orchids wouldn't be in places like that any longer. Like there's an orchid that was known from Greenwood Cemetery, but then the cemetery was built up around it and it was lost. So that's pretty much the story around. And also another thing with orchids is that if you buy orchids or plants that are kind of persnickety for your garden, like Trillium, make sure they are what's the terminology? That they are nursery grown and that they're grown from seed at that nursery. It can't just be nursery grown, nursery propagated and grown. Because what a lot of places will do, maybe I shouldn't say a lot, some places will go out into the wild, dig up the Trillium, bring it back, put it in their pot and put their dirt around it. So if you're looking in a pot and you see like two different, like markedly different kinds of soil, that's a clue. If the Trillium only costs like $7, it's really cheap, that's a clue. Those kinds of plants cost more and they're expensive because of the care and dedication of the nursery grower. And so you want to pay for that. You don't want to take shortcuts when it comes to buying those kinds of plants because it'll drive up the trade of stealing plants from the wild. And in fact, house plants were very huge in the pandemic. And a lot of the things that we think of as house plants, like little sedum and all kinds of little cute things that maybe come from Cape Town, South Africa, and other places that are not New York City, they're being stolen in the wild, and it's really bad. So it's really important that you know the source of the plants that you're buying, and you do it as a very conscientious person who does a little bit of research. So yeah.
Good to know. Regina, did you want to add to that?
I just wanted to say, yes, Marielle, you're right. We did plant those. We did get them from a good nursery. They were very expensive. And they did well for a long while. And David Tapp did this really nice write-up in the Times. I mean, we were so pleased that they were growing. And coincidentally, I heard from Eric, the woodland manager there today, that yes, they've been gone for a couple of years. And most likely somebody stole them, which is really frustrating because they were there for a while, and people were really enjoying them, and they were starting to really do well. Daniel's here, although we collected, well, photographed anyway, for our flora of Central Park. We recorded that they were there. We did record that they were not spontaneous, but yeah, very, very frustrating that people are still stealing plants from the wild. I mean, even though Central Park's not the wild.
Right. Well, but but it is too, right?
It is, yeah.
Right, yeah. Also too, can you shout out your paper, your awesome flora paper?
Well, Daniel Atha and I and Ken Chea from Linnaean Society, we did the spontaneous vascular flora of Central Park. And it's published by Torrey Botanical Society. And we spent 3 years documenting the plants that grow wild in Central Park. So things that have been, as far as we can tell, regenerating on their own. So not the tulips and not the daffodils, but things, things that have been planted and then are, established a wild population. So really fun project that we worked on, and more places need to do that. So that we can, like Marielle, share what's there and know what's there so that we can preserve it.
Thank you. And I want to say Daniel is tuned in tonight and has asked a question. We're about to get, actually, Daniel asked the question about Staten Island.
Yep.
Oh, okay, right. Oh, hi, Daniel. Thanks for that really good question.
And I think Ken was on earlier, and Ken works with H2O too. He helps to train our guides.
Oh, that's great.
Very lucky for it. Yes. Somebody asked, when you say exotic, do you mean non-native?
Yes, and shame on me because I should have defined it. What happens with native, not native? What does it mean? you know, why do we care? And I said a little bit about why we care, but the native part is everything has to be native to a place. You have to say geography. So I should have defined it. My apologies. So exotic means not indigenous to New York City. And plants that have been in New York City, like according to the pollen record, would be plants that are native to here. And we have pretty clean boundaries around plants that are native and not native to New York, unlike other places where there's been kind of more maybe global trade happening, you know, like the country of Turkey and, you know, lots of places there's been. And of course, you know, native people lived here. There was trade, you know, all kinds of really rich cultures and rich heritage. But I'd say largely plants that were, you know, and of course the landscapes were manipulated. Apparently they had orchards of beach plum and other native growing plants that produce fruit, like, you know, incredibly rich and detailed and smart and amazing. In the way that the plants would move around, by and large, I'd say that they were never left their natural range. So it wasn't as if a plant from California was coming into New York, but maybe a plant, you know, from Connecticut was coming into New York. Well, our flora is largely the same. So with that in mind, the way plants would move around, yeah, that nativity wouldn't be an issue. But yeah, so things that are native to New York City, thank you. Things that are native to New York City, there are people that know. One of my colleagues who's actually going to be leading a walk, a good friend of mine, Dr. Andy Greller, who's with the Torrey Botanical Society and Long Island Botanical Society, and he leads walks and he's amazing. He can tell you about plants that are native to Long Island or native to the Bronx and not native to Long Island. Oh, that plant came into Queens on nursery stock. I've only seen it growing wild in Staten Island. Like, yeah, so you can get that granular if you want to, and he does. But yeah, the nativity of things is important only because we care about the ecological relationships. It's not about being a native plant snob.
Great answer. So Louisa asks as a follow-up, can we save seeds? And we do actually here in New York City, and Marielle alluded to it. The New York City Parks runs their Greenbelt Native Plant Center. And we were fortunate to get to visit it. H2O was, and we brought some students and our guides. And they collect native seeds or indigenous seeds from the tri-state area, I think 100-mile radius or so around New York City. And they store the seeds, and then they'll propagate them when they're needed, and then plant them in natural areas all around the city. And that's one of the things that H2O helps with, is to plant these indigenous plants in natural areas in different parks around the city. And we did that for Arbor Day. We planted over 200 trees in Staten Island and in Highland Park in Brooklyn.
That's really great. That's awesome.
Oh, thank you. Beth points out that Frederick Law Olmsted brought in exotic plants and knotweed, unfortunately.
Oh, did he knotweed? I didn't know that. Knotweed. Well, which knotweed? I guess that's the question. There's a bunch of them.
She says Japanese knotweed.
Oh, really? Oh, no. I didn't know that. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, he did. I guess the ones that I knew about were more like, you know, mimicking the Adirondacks, and so bringing in more like upstate, higher elevation species. I didn't know that about the Japanese knotweed. That's interesting.
Joan lets everyone know that there's a huge mockernut hickory in Pelham Bay Park. So
Awesome.
check that out. Yeah.
Yeah, Pelham Bay Park has a lot of really amazing, cool plants. It's absolutely worth checking out. I did a plant walk there a couple weeks ago, and we'll have to do another one because there's so much to see and not enough time.
The Flatbush Gardener points out that the largest portion of New York City's urban forest is on private property.
Is that true? Urban forest, I guess, I'm not sure, maybe.
No, it's
Um,
not true.
Yeah.
If you look at the recently released State of the Urban Forest report from the
Oh,
Nature Conservancy, that's the reference. You could look at page 31 of that report.
Okay, thanks. And then I'm going to drop it in the chat for everybody.
okay.
Um,
But
uh,
is that, what are they talking about? Like natural areas, or they're talking about people's
No,
backyards?
it's anything that's not owned by the city, state, et cetera. So it
Right,
includes both private homes, but it also includes cemeteries,
right.
botanic gardens, et cetera.
And street trees and stuff.
No, street trees are parks.
Right. Oh,
Street
I
trees
see what
are,
you mean.
yeah, street trees are the
Right,
domain of the Parks Department, so that counts towards parks.
right. Okay. So you're talking about like, right, urban forest. Yeah. Okay. And so I have to say, like, I hate that term. I hate that urban forest. I know. But I hate, and I'm going on record saying this, but I hate that urban forest is used for so many different things that are so vastly different. So the idea of an urban, and Chris, of course, has heard me say this a million times because he and I are friends in real life. But the fact that urban forest is used as this sort of like umbrella terminology for all of the street trees and trees in people's backyards, and also trees that have evolved to live in Pelham Bay Park like for thousands of years since the glaciers retreated. Those are two polar opposite kinds of trees. One that was planted for aesthetics from a very limited gene pool from a nursery, and one that has evolved. It has a local ecotype and it's wild and reflects the vagaries and weather and conditions of New York City. Those are very, very different kinds of trees. And so I know the US Forest Service calls any tree within a city boundary an urban tree, and so they're all urban forests. But I think it's terrible. And I think that also allows our elected officials to get away with calling things, oh, it's an urban forest, and if we cut it down and replant it later, it doesn't matter. It does matter. There's a paper that was done looking at changes in flora over time, and this was done in France. And the researchers looked at the flora in an area that had always been wild and flora that had been cultivated in Roman times. So it had been cultivated thousands of years ago. And so current modern conditions, and looking at the flora, the place that had always been wild had different species makeup than the place that had been formerly cultivated. The formerly cultivated had far more weedy exotic species in it. So the message there is that you can't ever go back. If you've done something to it, there's no way to go back. There's no going back. You can restore and try to have, your goal be something lesser than it was. But once you lose the thing that it was, that original condition, you can't ever go back. And you can strive to have it be better, but it'll never be as good as it was. That's why conservation is so critical, and saving habitat in situ is absolutely critical. And it's not just for me. This is like, peer-reviewed research that anyone can find if you Google it.
Great, thank you.
Sorry for the rant.
It's interesting. Thanks. Let's have maybe two more questions. I'm going through the chats. There's so many interesting points. Oh, and thanks for putting in the link to your article, Daniel. Daniel's article, Regina's article, and Ken's article.
Oh, great. Perfect. Thank you so much.
Tashlik asks, so many mulberry trees in the Bronx. I heard someone was hoping to set up the silk industry and brought them here from China. True or urban myth?
I think that is true, but they didn't bring it to New York City. They brought it, I believe, to Massachusetts. And I should say that mulberry, again, mulberry is a genus. It's Morus, M-O-R-U-S. And what's the species? So we have Morus rubra, which is our native species, and what you're referring to is Morus alba, which is an Asian species. Morris alba is white mulberry, alba for white, and it's highly invasive. And the tree was purportedly brought to the States to help start, a silk industry, to help feed the silkworms. But as it turns out, there was an existing mulberry that already grew here. It was Morris rubra, red mulberry. And red mulberry is very rare in New York City. It's native, it's very rare. And in fact, its genetics are probably swamped out by the Morris alba, because Morris alba is everywhere. So any kind of like pollen exchange, I'd imagine, would have some hint of like, the white mulberry in it. But I understood the same thing to be true.
Okay. I'm looking for the last question of the night, and with that, I'd like to add. I hope this conversation continues. I'm sure Marielle is open to more questions. So if you do have them, please reach out to us. Everybody should have our contact information at NYC H2O, because presumably you signed up for the talk and you got an email confirming. So you can definitely reach us. And so for the last question, it'll be a comment. The New York Public Library does plant swaps, and Louisa shared that link with us. So I am going to copy and paste that. And
That's neat. I didn't know that.
Yeah, kind of cool, right?
Yeah, that's really, really cool. That's great to know. Thank you, Louisa, for sharing that.
Yeah. And with that, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us. And I'd like to thank Marielle so much. Such a fascinating talk. I learned so much, and I look forward to working with you again soon. We will all do our wild dance of joy, hopefully this summer or sometime shortly after that.
Thank you so much, Matt. This was really fun, and I'm so grateful for you hosting this, and thanks everyone for coming.
Thank you. Okay. Bye, everybody.
Bye.